Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on why lead gen campaigns miss the mark. I am Stacy McMaster, the GM of Leads Programs here at Trust Radius. I am so happy to be joined by Cassidy today. Cassidy, if you would introduce yourself, please.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Cassidy Milder. I am the Vice President of Digital Demand Marketing at Master Control. I like to say that I really grew up in lead generation. So being here today to talk about this topic, it is a point of passion for me, and I'm so enthusiastic about this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. I know how passionate you are about this topic, and I am so excited to dive in. So some topics today that we will cover will be things like gaps in our current lead gen campaigns, what channels and tactics exist, what to avoid, what to go for, and really best practices to accelerate your pipeline generation. So with all of that being said, why don't we just dive in? I think a great place to start is understanding the gaps in current lead gen campaigns. I know this is a topic that I could talk about all day. So this is a great place to start. From your experience, what are the most common reasons that traditional lead gen campaigns are failing to deliver quality leads?
I have two big pillars that I want to talk about with this one. And I think there are so many directions we can take both of these areas of conversation. But the first is I think teams can overcorrect on one end of the funnel or another. We see teams that focus way too heavily on awareness. That's all about getting new leads in the door, but kind of failing to do that full nurture conversion towards the bottom of the funnel. Or we can see teams that go all in on the bottom of the funnel and they forget to keep that brand awareness live. And then you can kind of squeeze out what's available in your funnel way too quickly and wonder, why am I not getting more people in the door? And so that's kind of point number one. I think people just get lost here or over here. And then point number two is data or lack thereof. So missing this focus on funnel data, but also on intent and behavioral data, lack of coordination on data, which makes it hard to understand how to optimize campaigns. So you could be doing everything right. And if you have none of the information, it's going to be really hard to maintain doing everything right.
I love that point that you bring up about focusing too much on certain stages of the funnel. The way that I have always looked at lead generation campaigns is it's really an opportunity to build your community that you can turn into opportunities and possibly sales down the road. And, as being a salesperson or a marketer, no one wants to end up in that situation, right? Where all you have is bottom of the funnel, and then some of that starts to convert, and then it's, oh, wait, my pipeline is gone.
Totally.
No one wants that. So that is really an excellent point that you bring up. And, and the ability to have the alignment between marketing and sales on these programs and where they are in the funnel, how to effectively nurture and score them. I mean, all of that makes the biggest difference.
Absolutely. And I think that point on alignment is huge. That open feedback loop between sales and marketing so that you actually know where are you landing in the funnel. I think that's immediately one of the ways you can catch if there is a shift in that over-reliance as well.
I love that. So on that note, how can marketers better align their lead gen efforts with actual buyer intent and help make sure that their teams know what's going on there?
This is such an interesting one, especially with where we are in the world. There are so many tools out there that start to give marketers information on intent and behavioral data, right? And I think there are a couple of ways we can look at it. I am going to die on this hill today of taking this holistic approach to marketing where you go top, middle, and bottom of funnel and touch on every area of that. And I think getting access to that intent and behavioral data at each stage of the funnel is absolutely imperative. So there are plenty of tools accessible to marketers now that show in-market data, for example, where it might be that top of funnel information. People start to search for keywords that align with marketing SEO or paid search strategies. And that info needs to be gathered to help drive content strategy, to help drive those paid demand gen efforts, to help drive SEO efforts. But you also have bottom of the funnel data, and I'll, give Trust Radius a shout out here, but the bottom of funnel data that we can have when you actually see your prospects showing intent for you and for your competitors, it really feeds that down funnel messaging. It feeds outbound strategy. I think it just really enables those conversations to happen better. And as you just asked, right, how do we work with all of that data? It does need to fit into that full funnel build out of our marketing approach, and used in that way. So you're actually using that data intelligently at every stage that people are engaging with you.
That is so true. And when it comes to this buyer intent data, I think it's understanding, like you said, the phases, the part of the funnel that these different intent signals are in. But another big thing that I see happen a lot is people trying to take the data that they're seeing and turn it into what they want it to be. They want it to be more down funnel. They want it to be this specific super duper ideal ICP. And instead of listening to the intent data that you're seeing, right? Like, this is what the data is telling us. So how can we take that and turn that into something, right? How do we pivot and change our approach, maybe, if the data is telling us maybe it's something a little bit different than we thought it would tell us, right? So all of this is so important.
I love this topic. Again, I kind of have two things I want to respond to that with. The first is, yes, people do what I call hope casting instead of forecasting.
I love that.
Yes, we all want to win. We want everyone in our addressable market to come and engage with our marketing and our sales teams and our products. But wanting it and actually achieving it are really different. And so having that focus on data to enable you to actually forecast effectively is so important. Bear with me because I want to share a little bit of a metaphor on this one. So I think of data hygiene like dental hygiene. So say you're someone that is really, really good about scheduling your twice a year appointments with your dentist. And you might say, I'm really focused on my dental health because I have this appointment with my dentist twice a year. I'm doing the end goal of actually going to those dental appointments. But in the meantime, you're not flossing and you're not brushing. This to me is the same thing as focusing on that output of pipeline creation without looking at any of the leading indicator metrics that are actually going to get you to pipeline creation. So just like we brush our teeth twice a day, right? We should be checking our data twice a day. And to actually build a system that gets you to the output you want really means digging into data with your channels, with your campaigns, with all of your activities, defining success in each of those areas, and then measuring it super consistently.
Absolutely. It's certainly a pitfall that we see people fall into sometimes, where, we have all of this data that is showing you the different profiles of companies that are interested in your product, that are looking at your pages, that are comparing you to your competitors. And it's, well, but that's not what I want to target. And it's like, are you sure? Because it seems like they're interested. So, yeah, it's really, data, it's only as good as how well you listen to it, right? So this is all great. So we've defined what we want to do. We're listening to the data. We've got lead gen strategies rolling. We're doing it at all stages of the funnel. What we want to do is make sure that it's performing, right? So as we're looking at this, what are some warning signs early on and through the life cycle of a campaign that usually pop out to you to make you think, this might not be performing the way that I want it to?
Yeah, so we're going to drill right back into this data piece, right? I'm going to use a specific simple example. So let's talk about a paid social campaign, for example. There are targets and metrics that you want to track specific to that channel that tell you, is this performing the way I want it to be? Really simple one. Are you actually bringing in leads through that channel? So say you're checking that on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and you've got a campaign that's performing wonderfully. You've got it in for a few weeks. It's going great. It's bringing in leads. If you start to see that change, you've been averaging a certain number in a day, in a week, and that starts to pivot, that is your first warning sign, right? And the way that I like to think about this is any anomaly, any change in data that you're seeing should get you to ask yourself two questions. The first is, what's causing the change? The second is, what can I do about that, right? And so you start to see a decline in the information coming in and the leads you're generating. In this example, it could be, okay, it's been in market for a while. The content or the creative is exhausting. The other thing could be, okay, I'm doing something off with my targeting. It's not quite working the way I expected. Maybe the first couple weeks were a fluke. Like, you really need to dig into every piece of available data to try to identify what is it, set your positive action, and then move forward. And the reason I use, paid social as an example, it's because, that's a simple one, but we should be doing that everywhere. You can't just get to the end of a quarter and say, my demand gen strategy didn't work, because you're never going to be able to answer, what about it didn't work? What am I going to change now? The second you see anything adjusting, you've got to be on top of it. And that's from every single channel you're running, right? Every single piece of content you have in market, and really doing those micro analyses of all of those pieces, because a little bit here and there makes a really big difference when you get to the end of a quarter.
Absolutely. So for me, a big thing I always think about is execution, right? Yeah. So you have this strategy and you think everybody's on board with how it's going to work, what the targeting is going to be, what your language is going to be, how you're going to follow up. But then, are those things actually happening? Yes. Through the process is such a major thing. And, I know we were talking about paid social, but if you think about it from a lead generation standpoint, for example, how often do we hear someone in sales say something to the effect of, these leads aren't converting, that means these leads are bad, right? And so that's where I love when you say, well, first figure out what's changed. Why is that happening? If we've found success with this type of program before, other types of programs, what are we doing differently now, right? And actually taking a step and looking into that. Are these leads really bad? Are these ads really underperforming? Or is there a problem with our execution? So data and execution are my two, that's my hill.
I love that. And I want to expand on that even a bit more, because it's also this open feedback loop, right? And it's lead and account scoring. So to everything you just said, maybe sales responds and says, these aren't converting. Maybe they're just not ready. And that might be an indicator to the marketing team to say, okay, what score was I giving these leads? And are any of them converting if they get recycled, if they stay in the nurture path a little bit longer? And what does that tell me about how I scored them? Shouldn't be this tension point between marketing and sales of, this isn't working. It's, how can we make this work, right? And what do we need to change, not only in how we're executing, but in how we're reporting and building things operationally?
Absolutely. I sometimes think that there is too much pivoting of strategy happening when the data and the results aren't showing you exactly what you want it to. There's this tendency that people have sometimes to just say, all right, well, we're a month in and this isn't working, let's shift strategy, instead of, okay, we're a month in, what went wrong with the execution?
And yeah. I'm really going nuts with this conversation. I love it. I think in addition to that, right, there's a variation of risk that marketers should be taking when we roll out new campaigns, content, strategies, etc. And so you say like, oh, we're a month and nothing's working. You don't want to scrap a month's worth of work. You need to be building out, what is my rollout plan? How can I test as I go? How can I understand what I see that is and isn't working, so I'm never at a point of zero?
Right, exactly. And just because something didn't convert on touch 1 through 7 doesn't mean that it will not convert on touches 7 through 14, right?
It's so true. It's so true.
Absolutely. And we see it all the time. So we've talked a lot in this call so far, in the short time we've been together, about making sure that you're targeting across the funnel at all times. So when you're looking at ABM and demand gen working together, how are you building those parameters of who to target across the funnel?
I love this question too. Demand gen and account-based marketing have to be complementary. I think in the past few years, maybe even past 10 years, there's been this big push on account-based marketing as the approach. And in my experience, it can't be the only approach. It should be a way to really amplify your demand gen strategies. And so I think about always on programs, demand generation programs, and account-based marketing programs in levels. You have your very top, which is your always on. This is a lot of your organic programming, SEO, your website, where anyone in the world could find you if they were looking. Then you have your demand generation level, which is targeting your true serviceable addressable market. Who is your ICP audience, and how do you get that broad reach to that entire SAM? Then you have your account-based marketing, which can be done in a few ways, right? You can target portions of that SAM where you might say, here's a niche group of my audience that I see convert a little bit better. I can make the messaging a little bit different. Or you can use it to really hone in based on that intent and behavioral data, right? You can say, okay, there are pieces of my marketing or pieces of my marketing budget that I'm going to apply in the warmest segment of my audience, where you start to see some of that hand raised behavior start to happen and you really jump on it. And then finally, you can do your true personalized one-to-one account-based marketing. This is especially relevant for organizations going after big key enterprise accounts where there are specific accounts that we really not only want to win, but think are possible to win. And you can build those personalized campaigns that are usually versions of your demand generation that you can just work from to really personalize to that audience. I've gone on a bit of a tangent with that one, so I'm going to check back in with you and
Yeah.
take this.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said about ABM being a strategy, but not the only strategy. This is, I think, by far one of the biggest trends that I've seen over the last decade of focusing primarily on lead generation. It's everybody, not everyone, but a lot of people are so almost obsessed with having everything fall into this ABM list that they have made of this is my ideal ICP, this is who we want to sell to, and then automatically discounting anything that is a little bit outside of that, right? And so we see this a lot with intent signals. And when we're building out strategies for how to take these companies that are showing these buyer downstream intent signals and turn them into leads, where it's okay, that's great, but can we only target the ones that overlap with our ABM? And it's a great strategy to layer your ABM list with it from a scoring perspective, a nurture perspective. You're obviously going to treat those leads a little bit differently if you know they are on your ABM list and showing downstream intent signals. But do you really want to forget about all of these other companies? I mean, right? If I'm a salesperson and someone calls me and says, I want to buy from you, I'm not going to say, you're not on my ABM list. Sorry, I can't sell to you, right?
Yes, I
So
completely agree. I completely agree. And going even back to data, right? I do think there is validity in understanding the typical types of companies, organizations, or buyers who might move faster or might have bigger deals. You cannot ignore people that want to buy your product. And so it really is this space for saying, yes, we're going to look at those leads. We're going to address them appropriately. We're not going to ignore them. And I think that all goes into the data too, because maybe your SAM does change over time. And without this information, this intent coming in, these other accounts coming in, you could completely miss an expansion opportunity to really discover another type of business, another specific audience who has a really good fit or use case. And so this is where you can't just set and forget any of your strategies either, right? And when we think about lead and account scoring and responsive behavior on the marketing and sales side, if you start to see a new pattern, be open to that pattern, be willing to adjust. You can't say, well, I set my lead account scoring last year. I'm 100% confident in it now forever. You have to be willing to adjust based on what's actually happening in the market. And this type of really specific intent behavior is giving you that information. So there is a sense of flexibility that just absolutely must exist.
absolutely. So this is a great lead-in, right? Because we've now just talked about how not to apply your how not to use intent to drive your lead gen strategy. Let's talk a little bit about how should you, right? How should you take intent signals and use that to drive your strategy?
We're going to go back yet again to this full funnel approach, right? I think it's so relevant. I can't stop saying it. So you'll hear it from me again, I'm sure. But I think it's really, what intent are you seeing? And an example, right, for an organization that sells multiple products, I think one really solid example is that intent might tell you which product is most relevant for the person engaging. And it starts to enable you to build different nurtures based on the intent you're actually seeing. In my organization, we do have several products, and we have buyers that overlap two of them. And so there's this question mark of, how should we nurture or segment them if they could be in the buying group for multiple products? And we really want to give them information that's most relevant to the one that they're needing to solve for. And I think intent data is such a wonderful way to help you organize that. It again goes back to, don't push the outcome you want, push the outcome that's being shown to you. And you don't want to miss out on someone who you think is a better fit for buying group A when they're actually showing intent for buying group B. So I really think it feeds that nurture activity. And I know I'm really talking a lot on this one, so thank you for giving me the space. But additionally, you can think about feeding your inbound, your marketing, and your outbound. And I think when you start to see that really down funnel intent, this is where that outbound approach comes into play so much more effectively. When you are able to do warm outreach to people showing specific down funnel intent for you, for your competitors, it really changes that conversation and gives much better footing for an outbound conversation than you might have had otherwise.
Absolutely. All right. So last question before we move on from gaps and kind of start to talk about what's changing. What tools, data, or technology will help you to sustain this strong lead gen strategy over time?
Such a great question. And there are so many tools out there today, right? That I think the granular answer could go a million different directions. So I'm going to talk kind of umbrella here. I think we really, really need to have great marketing automation, a clean CRM, and really solid data visualizations. When you have the foundations built for those three things, you have a system for your leads coming in, for being scored, same with your accounts. They're being passed through to sales in a way that's clean, that's understandable. And you have the ability to visualize everything that's happening and all of the pieces of your marketing strategy that are feeding that, you're going to be in a good place. So there are a lot of tools that could be applied at each of those levels. But those are where we really need to land.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about some kind of new channels and tactics that have emerged over the years. I mean, I would say, and I think you've said it too on this call, over the last decade, things have changed, but especially, in my opinion, over the last few years, there has been this massive shift in what channels are proving effective. So, what would you say are some emerging or underrated channels that are proving to be very effective for lead generation today?
Okay, so here's my hottest take of this conversation, I think, which is that to some degree, marketing in the world we're in today, it's all so cyclical. And so we're actually starting to see almost a shift backwards in some of the approaches that are working for us now. For example, in-person events and direct mail. These were really big maybe 10 years ago. I think events had a really interesting time of what was happening with them going through the pandemic, right? And this resurgence now, I think, is stronger than ever. And I bring that up because there's been so much technological advancement that lets almost every organization digitally saturate their audience. And that's happened, right? We're almost immune to some of the biggest marketing tactics of the recent past. Like, people still engage with email. I'm never going to give up on email, but it's a lot harder. It is not the tool that it once was, and people are just ignoring it. Same with some digital advertising, right? We have to do it. We want to get those impressions on people's brains, but attention spans are short. And so really getting people back in person, giving them that snail mail touch that feels unique again, is really starting to make a difference.
It is so true how, even when we think about, I used to get excited about getting email.
Yeah.
It used to be this big thing. Like, before we had it on our phone, like, not to date myself, but I remember, going out for lunch and being excited to come back and check my emails. Did my customer get back to me? What's going on there? And, I don't think people get really excited to check their email anymore.
No, now it's just how much do I have to delete? What do I have to wade through? And yeah, you're gonna find some gems in the mix, but
Right.
it is
Right. But
so
like you said, it's not dead. There's no type of thing, despite what we see on LinkedIn or anywhere else. Email's not dead. Calling's not dead. Paid ads aren't dead. Lead gens aren't, it's everything still works. It's just, like we've talked about, just the using a variety of approaches to make sure that you're hitting your goals. And I would say snail mail to me is the biggest surprise and kind of what's starting to make a comeback, right? I mean, even like when I get mail now, I actually look at it. Most of my bills are digital, so
it's completely flip-flopped. It completely has. And the other big conversation, I think it's something we can't ignore, right, is AI in marketing too, right? And so when you do look at the evolution happening on the digital side, there's so much here. And I think it can be so helpful. It can also be so distracting. So when we think about like balancing our organic approaches, we're now dealing with AI overviews. And something really interesting that I'm starting to see is that the click-through rate on AI overviews is really, really low, because the intention is they give you the information. You don't have to go somewhere else to read the rest of it. But we have to figure out how to fill that space, right? As marketers, we still want to be featured there. And then the hope is you get people back through another channel, through the halo effect on direct. And I just think that's another really interesting thing happening in the world as we balance all these different touch points.
Right, exactly. AI, it's sometimes I think from a marketing lead generation standpoint, is AI the new ABM, right? Is everybody going to put all their eggs in the AI basket? And I think AI is great, and I've seen so much impressive stuff with what it's able to do to help us fuel our marketing and lead generation strategies. But it really is interesting that you say that the when you're using AI, it is improving one thing, but now you might have another gap to fill because your click through rates are different. Because there's no need for anybody to click through. So it's a very interesting topic.
It is totally fascinating. And from a content development perspective too, I mean, there's so much you can do with it, but there's so much everyone can do with it, which means the competition and again the saturation just gets bigger. It's so interesting.
Yes, absolutely. And it just becomes this how can AI help this? Well, it's like AI doesn't have to help everything necessarily, right? You got to be strategic about where you use your AI to help you because it really can. And there's some really cool stuff out there. Uh,
Absolutely.
so this is a topic, my next question that I love. And it really goes back to what we talked about, I think, at the beginning of the call with making sure you're fueling all stages of your funnel. But how should marketers balance what they're paying for? So how do we balance paid versus organic lead generation strategies?
That is such a good point. And I will go back a little bit to my levels of marketing here because I really think organic does remain. You're always on. Like, truly, you can never ignore organic. This is your ability to find new audiences, to continue to capture the audience that knows exactly what they're looking for. And so you pay, right, for the audiences you want and the audiences that are bubbling up that you want to engage a bit further. And I think that's really an interesting way to approach the difference, right? Is that organic piece, yeah, it cannot go away. Pay for where you actually see the opportunity bubbling up. Go after that. Take advantage of the information that you're receiving, as we said, from intent data, even from what's happening in your organic channels, and amplify.
Absolutely. So all of that it's great and it is so true. So one thing I want to go back to a little bit, when we were talking about AI, you mentioned content, right? Content, very, very important. It really does play such a big role in things. So uh, in your world, what role is content playing in your lead gen? And how do you use it? And how can other brands use it to attract higher quality leads?
So content is still king, no matter what I say about the expansion of it. Content matters. The way that I think about building really effective lead generation strategies comes from content as the heart of your campaigns. I think of the anchor derivative asset model. So if you start to build around this anchor message, the point you're really trying to get across, and then you create derivatives that fit every stage of that funnel, that fit every buyer persona in your ICP, you can really build a little world of entry points for the people that you want to reach, for the people you don't know yet that you want to reach, to come in and start engaging. And the point of setting it up in this way is that you are essentially pre-setting nurture opportunities. So someone comes in on a specific topic and you've now created the surround sound of additional opportunities for them to engage further. That's how you build nurture. That's how you build up your lead scoring. And it really gives you the opportunity to learn what messages are resonating through the content that people are actually coming in on, the ones that people maybe come in on one piece of content and they never move forward, that might tell you it's not your best fit audience. For the assets where people come in and then they engage with 2, 3, 4 more assets, you've really hit on something right with that initial message. So I think it gives you the chance to continuously test what you're putting in market, to build out that nurture flow, and just to have a good continuous conversation with the people you want to reach.
That is so true. And one thing that I was thinking of when you were saying this is how much it relates to the conversation we had about the data, right? And making sure that, we're listening to the data. That data can help you fuel that content strategy. When you're running a lead or demand generation campaign, sometimes there's not a lot of thought that's put into that content. And when we talk about running lead generation programs to build your community, all right, well, you've built that community, but what content are you now going to serve up to that community? And I think so much of that comes back to the data piece, right? And understanding. So if you are leveraging intent buying signals to run your lead generation campaigns, like we do at Trust Radius, for example, with our intent driven leads program, it's the understanding what types of follow-up and nurture and content you might want to serve up to that audience. So maybe you have a really excellent piece of content about how you're different from your number one competitor. But if you're nurturing leads that aren't doing competitor research, they're probably not going to, they might not care about that, right? And so I've found in my experience, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that things like market reports and, peer validated content around customer stories and reviews, and setting yourself up as a thought leader and showing how you bring impact, to me are seeming to be the type of content that's resonating really, really strongly these days. Are you seeing that?
It is major. We do use the Trust Radius market reports. We use Trust Radius for reviews. We are big, big fans. And I will say this type of content in general is an absolute must. Case studies as well, right? I think really getting human feedback matters. And maybe this is going even back to the conversation around AI, right? People do want to know what their peers in industry are seeing, are doing, are engaging with. And so this down funnel content needs to play a major part within that broader campaign content story. I think it's a perfect example of a down funnel piece or way of creating that down funnel engagement, whether that's actually through a review site itself, whether that's through the asset piece of a market report. It's major. I mean, this goes to me a bit hand in hand with even your analyst reports, right? Of what are we actually seeing? And people still really, really care about this. They want to have that validation, that comparative information. So it's an excellent piece. It's got to be worked into that asset modeling.
Absolutely. And I think it all comes back to, we all want to know how you can help us, right? Like, and when I'm getting content, I am way more likely to engage with it and read it if it is geared towards, here's how I think I can help you.
Yes.
So I'm going to open it and read it, as opposed to, maybe something that's like, here's how I'm different from someone else. Or maybe I don't know anything about that someone else, right?
Yeah.
So it's all about making sure you're using all kinds of things, right?
Yeah. And you make such a good point, because there are people that want a direct comparison. There are some people that just want to know, what are the features that are relevant to me and how can I learn about them? What's going to solve my problem? And that's something that just in the scheme of content as a whole, it's so easy for marketers to forget. We want to talk about how great we are and our products are. And it's never the point. Even in a even in a case study, even in the most down funnel content, it still has to focus on the solution, the thing it solved, not the product.
Absolutely. Content, something I could talk about a lot all day. So, all right, we have talked about gaps. We have talked about new channels, tactics, how to leverage your intent, how to leverage your content. Why don't we end with avoiding pitfalls, right? So, how do we not only avoid pitfalls, but how do we make sure that our lead generation is thriving? So,
Totally.
we've definitely gone into this a little bit, but if you were to summarize what the biggest mistake you think marketers make when they're running lead gen campaigns, what would you say those biggest mistakes are?
The biggest mistake is not letting data drive your decision making. I think that captures so much of what we've talked about, right? Whether it's because you're putting your dollars, your effort in the wrong area, you're not balancing your dollars and your effort. All of that is going to be clear when data is used effectively. So the biggest mistake truly is not using data effectively.
Absolutely. So, something that you talked about earlier, which is a phrase that I haven't used before, but I love, is the hope casting versus the forecasting. I love that so much. It's such a great way to put it into perspective when we're talking about these types of programs. From a hope casting perspective, everybody wants the decision makers, right? And the decision makers are important. We want the decision makers. But, it's also important to target the influencers too. Sometimes you can't get right to the decision maker, but we do want to get to those as much as we can. So, how do you ensure that you are attracting those decision makers rather than just driving up volume, right? It's really the quality versus quantity discussion, right? But how do you ensure you're getting as many decision makers possible?
Absolutely. One, I think this is where that account-based marketing approach fits, right? You have the people you really want to reach, and intentionally targeting those titles, that audience, that really, really matters. And it's about lead scoring and actually taking the appropriate response when you start to bring in that quantity of non-decision makers. If you score them the same way you score decision makers, you're going to wind up getting data that says this is working. And you can wind up in exactly that pitfall of I'm going after quantity because I've scored these people the same way. When you really build a system that tells you in your operational programming, this was the title, this is how I scored it, this was the type of persona, this is how I scored it. You start to build information that makes optimizing your programs for those decision makers a lot easier.
Excellent. It's true. And it goes back to there's so many common themes in our conversation today. All right. We want a high performing lead gen flywheel. What does that look like? Right? What does that look like? How can teams implement one?
Yes. Okay. Love it. First, set clear targets. We talked about this, right? What is the strategy? What does success look like? Be granular about setting these targets. This goes back to differentiating how you measure your results by channel, by campaign, by any activity. Set targets down as deep as you can go so that you can see anything that might give you a red flag that you're off course. Then review your data. Just because you set the targets doesn't mean you're going to succeed, right? You have to review it constantly. That should be for channel owners daily. And then at every level, weekly, monthly, quarterly, you should constantly be looking. And then target effectively based on that data, right? Use what's working, amplify what's working, pivot where it's not working. Use intent and behavioral information, talk to your sales teams, talk to your lead development teams, keep that conversation clear so that you're never setting and forgetting any single motion, but consistently optimizing based on what you're seeing.
Awesome. Well, that's the goal, right? Everything you just said. That is the
easy.
goal, and easy, right? Easy peasy. Just so, all right, Cassidy, I have loved this conversation so much. I think we covered so much, and I'm so thankful that you gave us an hour of your time today
Stacey, thank
to
you
go through
so
this.
much. I right back at you. I love this topic. I know we said, I think you and I are both just so passionate about it, and having this conversation has been so fun.
Yes, thank you so much. And I guess with that, we'll end today.
Great. Thank you again.